The Seattle rain was a cold, unforgiving presence, a perfect match for the frigid emptiness that had just been carved into my life. I stood on the curb, the damp collar of my coat doing little to shield me from the biting wind, and watched as the front door to my home, the home I had lived in for 50 years, the home I had believed to be my sanctuary until my final day, slammed shut with a hollow, resounding finality. It wasn't just the sound of a door closing, it was the sound of my life being ripped from its roots, a violent and irreversible severance. The ornate, carved wood, a cherished symbol of welcome and family, now felt like a final, impenetrable wall, a tombstone for my past and a barrier to my future. My son, Daniel, and his wife, Clara, had just locked me out, leaving me on the street with nothing but the small, worn suitcase at my feet, a silent testament to their cruelty. In that single, horrifying moment, I wasn't just a 75-year-old widow. I was a vagrant, a castaway in a city I had helped to build. The vibrant lights of the neighborhood, a familiar and comforting glow just moments ago, now burned with a false warmth, a mockery of the cold reality I faced. My mind, usually a quiet and serene place, was a maelstrom of confusion and disbelief. A frantic, desperate voice in my head screamed, "How could you do this? How could you betray me?" But the truth that was beginning to dawn was far more terrifying than a simple question of morality. Daniel had his reasons, a twisted, convoluted logic born of a festering greed and a ruthless ambition that I had never truly understood. The quiet, unspoken resentment that had been building for years had finally erupted, leaving me to face the wreckage. I thought back to the piece of paper, a legal document he had presented to me with a smile, assuring me it was simply a matter of estate planning to simplify things for my own good. I had signed it without a moment's hesitation, an act of faith and unconditional love for my child. But it was a trap, a meticulous manipulation that had turned the home I had given him a share in into his sole property, and me into an unwanted ghost. As I looked up at the windows, now dark and unblinking, I saw a new, unfamiliar curtain being pulled closed, a final act of erasure, sealing off the life I had known. The person I had dedicated my life to, the boy I had raised and loved with every fiber of my being, had thrown me out like yesterday's trash. But even in the biting cold and the paralyzing shock, as the rain soaked my thin coat and the wind whipped through my hair, a quiet, fierce certainty began to flicker within me. I was not alone. The rain, which felt so cruel and punishing, suddenly felt like a cleansing, a sacred baptism of a life that was meant for more than what I had just lost. It was washing away the naivety, the blind trust, and the pain, leaving behind a profound and unbreakable faith. I knew with a certainty that transcended my terror and my grief, that my survival was not a matter of chance, but of grace. I was a witness to my own dispossession, to the cold-blooded treachery of my own flesh and blood, and I knew that a divine plan was already in motion. I was not just a victim. I was being prepared for something new, something that would teach me that true wealth is not measured in property deeds, but in the unwavering resilience of a soul that has been tested and not found wanting. My heart, which had been a frozen, hollow space just moments ago, began to beat with a new, quiet purpose. I was terrified, yes, but I was not defeated. Before we continue, make sure you follow our page so you don't miss our next true stories, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages with more people who need hope. My name is Evelyn. My late husband, Thomas, and I had built our lives in Seattle, and our home, a charming craftsman with a breathtaking view of Puget Sound, was our sanctuary. It wasn't just a house, it was a living scrapbook, every hand-laid brick, and every weathered floorboard holding a cherished memory. The old swing on the porch, where I used to rock Daniel as a baby, the kitchen where Thomas taught him to bake bread. These were not just places, but moments frozen in time. When Thomas passed away, he left the home to me, with a clear, loving clause that a portion would be transferred to our son, Daniel, upon my death. It was a common, loving gesture, meant to provide a future for him while ensuring I was cared for in my final years. Daniel, however, had a different plan. He and his wife, Clara, were a couple consumed by a ruthless ambition that I had naively dismissed as simple drive. They saw the home not as a sacred legacy of love and memory, but as a roadblock to their lavish, high society life. They were deeply in debt, drowning in a mountain of credit card debt, with maxed out American Express and Chase Sapphire cards from their frantic attempts to keep up with their friends. They had to own a home in a prestigious zip code and climb the social ladder, and my home, with its perfect location and vast equity, was their one way out. They needed to liquidate it, sell the land, and escape the crushing weight of their financial ruin. They had a plan, a twisted plot to inherit the house early. They hired a shady real estate attorney and forged my signature on a deed transfer, a criminal act so brazen it made my stomach turn. They told me it was a form of estate planning, a way to simplify things for my own good, a concept they had sold me with a professional, glossy brochure and a feigned concern that almost convinced me they were doing me a favor. I, in my naive trust, signed the papers, believing I was securing my son's future. I was blinded by my love for them, and I had no idea that their greed had transformed them into predators, that they were already plotting my end, and that the foundation of a lifetime of trust was about to crumble in a horrifying display of cold-blooded treachery. They had stalked the property, measuring its every square foot, calculating its value on Zillow and Redfin, and mapping out a plan to liquidate my life for their own selfish gain. They had already contacted multiple real estate agents and had a pre-approved buyer waiting in the wings. This wasn't a last-ditch effort. It was a meticulously orchestrated real estate fraud that had been festering in the dark for months. The betrayal was an act of ruthless efficiency, executed with a cold, calculated precision that left me reeling, a brutal business transaction disguised as a family visit. Daniel and Clara had planned every detail with the cunning of a criminal mastermind, leaving no room for my emotional pleas or physical resistance. They had chosen the timing with the precision of a professional thief, a rainy, miserable Tuesday afternoon when I had no one to help me. They had convinced me to go for a short drive with them to look at some new furniture for the house, a final, loving gesture that was nothing but a cruel deception. We drove through the city, and they chattered on with a nauseating cheerfulness, their voices a thin veneer of forced excitement about a life I was not a part of. Clara gushed about a new Patagonia jacket she'd just bought, and Daniel spoke with an almost manic enthusiasm about the new Tesla Model S he was eyeing, a car he could now afford. I, in my blissful ignorance, simply saw a young couple excited for their future, oblivious to the fact that my future was being dismantled with every mile we drove. When we returned, a massive, unmarked moving truck from a company I didn't recognize was parked outside my home, a shocking and bewildering sight. The scene was a whirlwind of motion, a desecration of my sanctuary. Men in rain-slick jackets were carrying out my life, piece by piece. I saw my mother's mahogany dresser, the one she had given me for my wedding, being loaded into the truck. Then the antique armchair from my husband's study, the one he had always sat in to read the newspaper. My entire life, my every memory, was being loaded into the back of a truck, and a large, intimidating man was putting a for sale sign on my front lawn, its bold, red letters screaming a message of my impending ruin. The reality of the situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was a property seizure. Daniel and Clara's faces, once a picture of serene innocence, were now a grotesque mask of feigned shock and sorrow, as if this was all a terrible, tragic misunderstanding. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice a forced, trembling whisper, "I'm so sorry. We're in a terrible situation. We have to sell the house. We have no choice." The words were a torrent of confession, an unburdening of a soul that had been holding a terrible secret for too long. His financial crime had come full circle. He wept, not with the dry, heaving sobs of a man trying to be strong, but with the broken, guttural cries of a man who had made a terrible mistake, but was too far gone to turn back. Clara, ever the opportunist, stood behind him, her eyes not on me, but on the moving men, ensuring they didn't damage any of the assets being transferred. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her for what she was, a fraudulent conspirator, a partner in a white-collar crime that had left me with nothing. He tried to reach for me, but his hands were too weak, trembling with pain and the aftershocks of his betrayal. The sight of my home, my sanctuary, being dismantled and sold for their selfish gain, was a pain unlike any I had ever known. They handed me a small box of my belongings, a cruel final gesture. My photo album, a few heirlooms, and my old iPhone with a dead battery. "You'll be fine, Mom," Clara said, a chill in her voice that sent shivers down my spine. "You can stay with friends. We'll call you once we get settled." The words were a thinly veiled lie. I stood on the street, watching as their car, a silver speck on the horizon, sped away. The trail of dust it kicked up a final, desolate message of my abandonment. They left me alone, without a car, a phone, or any way to get help. They drove away, believing I would simply perish in the rain, that my passing would look like a tragic accident, a terrible mishap that would free them from the burden of my love and the obstacle to their insurance claim. It was a civil lawsuit waiting to happen, a family dispute that had spiraled into a felony, and I, the intended victim, was left to pick up the pieces, my heart an empty, echoing space, a foreclosure of the human spirit. I had walked for hours, my body aching and my heart broken. The rain had soaked me to the bone, and I was cold, exhausted, and utterly defeated. I found a small park bench and slumped onto it, my suitcase a heavy, silent presence at my feet. I didn't cry. The tears were frozen, a silent testament to the pain that was now my constant companion. I looked at the dark sky and spoke a prayer, not of anger, but of a quiet, desperate plea for a sign. Just as the words left my lips, a ray of light, a single, impossibly bright beam, cut through the clouds. It wasn't the sun. It was a radiant, golden light that fell upon me and the suitcase, filling me with a warmth that had nothing to do with the outside world. At that same moment, a voice in my mind, as clear as a bell, told me to go to the nearby cafe. "There is a man waiting for you," the voice whispered. I obeyed, and as I walked, the rain seemed to part for me, creating a narrow, dry path. The streetlights, which had been flickering just moments before, now pulsed with a life and warmth that had nothing to do with electricity. I found the cafe, a small, unassuming place with a sign that said, "The Golden Spoon." The light that had guided me was emanating from a man sitting at a table by the window. He was an unassuming man, with a weathered face and a quiet strength. He was a former pastor, a man who had spent his life walking in faith and obedience to a higher power. He later told me he felt a strange, inexplicable pull, a feeling of unease, a deep, unshakable certainty that he was not alone. His mind, trained for logic and quick decision-making, screamed for him to ignore the feeling and follow his route. But a sense of absolute, unshakable certainty compelled him to obey this unexplainable guidance. He couldn't articulate why he was moving, only that he had to. He found me there unharmed and completely calm. He later said my eyes were glowing with a light that had nothing to do with the sun. He bought me a cup of coffee and listened to my story without judgment, his face etched with a quiet, knowing sadness. He didn't offer me money or a place to stay. He simply offered me a new perspective. "Your son may have taken your home," he said, his voice gentle, "but he could not take your legacy. It is not in the walls of a house, but in the heart of a mother." He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. It was a map, a crudely drawn sketch of a place I had never known existed. "There is a charity that needs a manager," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "A woman with a heart for others." He gave me a name and a phone number, and as I left, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The storm, which had been raging just moments before, had passed, and the stars were beginning to emerge, a final, poetic punctuation to the betrayal. The timing was impossibly perfect, a testament to the fact that this was not a rescue by chance, but a divinely ordained miracle. The charity I was led to was a small, unassuming place that provided shelter and support for the homeless. I started as a volunteer, and in a few short weeks, I became their new manager. I found a sense of purpose and belonging I had never known. The people I met were my new family, their stories a testament to the fact that I was not alone. I had a new home, a new life, and a new reason to live. I poured my heart and soul into the work, finding a healing for my own wounds in the act of helping others. I organized a weekly soup kitchen that became a community hub, a place of warmth and comfort for those who had none. I used my knowledge from a lifetime of home management to streamline the shelter's operations, turning a small, struggling charity into a thriving, life-saving organization. My days were filled with purpose, with the quiet joy of making a tangible difference in the lives of others, a stark and beautiful contrast to the life I had lost. Meanwhile, Daniel and Claire's lives began to unravel. Their initial euphoria was a thin, fragile veneer over a festering reality. The mansion they had bought was a gilded cage, a financial black hole. The sheer cost of maintaining a home of that size, the taxes, the landscaping, the utilities, was a constant, draining torrent of hidden fees and unexpected bills. Their lavish lifestyle, once a source of pride, was now a constant, humiliating source of stress. They couldn't afford to keep up with their friends, the very people they had so desperately wanted to impress. The invitations to exclusive clubs and charity galas stopped coming, their social circle crumbling into a collection of polite nods and avoided glances. Their investments, a series of risky and foolish ventures in the volatile tech stock market, went south, wiping out their remaining savings in a single, brutal crash. The house was foreclosed on, and they were left with nothing. They were forced to sell their expensive cars and jewelry to pay off their mounting debts. Their once glamorous life now a memory of shame and ruin. Their fall from grace was a slow, agonizing descent into desperation. They bounced from one cheap motel to another, their lives a constant, humiliating search for a place to sleep and a meal to eat. The cold reality of homelessness, a reality I had only touched for a moment, now consumed their every waking hour. They had no one to turn to, no friends to lean on, and no family to offer them a helping hand. The very people they had so desperately wanted to be a part of had abandoned them, seeing their failure as a contagion to be avoided. They were alone, homeless, and utterly defeated. The first time I saw them, they were huddled on the streets of Seattle, just a few feet from the homeless shelter I managed. They were unrecognizable, their faces etched with a pain and shame I had never seen before. Their clothes were dirty, their hair unkempt, and their eyes were hollowed out by the sheer weight of what they had done. They were the very people I was now helping, a cruel and perfect poetic justice. Their once immaculate clothes were replaced by tattered rags, their perfect posture now a hunched, defeated posture of a man who had lost everything. They were begging for spare change, holding out a hand that had once held an expensive leather wallet, now trembling with shame. I approached them, my heart beating with a quiet certainty that this was not a rescue by chance, but a divinely ordained miracle. "Daniel," I said, my voice gentle, "I'm here." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw a tidal wave of emotion, fear, pain, and a raw, unadulterated shame. He saw me not as the frail old woman he had abandoned, but as a beacon of light, a symbol of everything he had lost. "Mom," he choked out, his voice hoarse, a shadow of the arrogant man he had once been. "I'm so sorry. We're so sorry." The words were a torrent of confession, an unburdening of a soul that had been holding a terrible secret for too long. He wept, not with the dry, heaving sobs of a man trying to be strong, but with the broken, guttural cries of a little boy who had made a terrible mistake. They didn't beg for money or a place to stay. They simply begged for my forgiveness. The home I lost was not a possession to be sold. It was a sanctuary of love, a legacy of my husband's heart. My son, in his foolish pursuit of wealth, had stolen from me the one thing that was not mine to give, my home. But in doing so, he had given me something infinitely more valuable, my freedom. I was now free from the chains of material possessions, free to find a new purpose, and free to live a life of meaning and purpose. The most precious inheritance is not what you gain, but what you preserve through faith and love. The true treasure is not in the walls of a house, but in the heart of a mother who has been tested and not found wanting. My story is a painful but powerful warning. A life built on greed is a house built on sand, ready to collapse at the slightest tremor. But a life built on faith, love, and grace is a fortress, unassailable against even the most destructive storms. If this story has resonated with you, if you have faced your own storms of betrayal or loss, I pray you will take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Recognize the unseen hand that has guided you. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages of hope and resilience with more people who are searching for their own beacon of light in the darkness. Thank you, and may God bless you in your darkest moments and beyond.